Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, we have the second part of a three-part series here on my channel where we're looking at the best defenders, the best midfielders, and the best forwards. The best defenders video was released yesterday. Best forwards will be tomorrow. But if you are enjoying this series and the content here on this channel, please do drop a like, comment, subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into today's video. Right, this one here is going to be an absolute monster video because there are just so many midfielders at so many different price points to choose from. We've got 4 different price points. We're going to go through the players at each of those price points, and I'll tell you who I think are the best options. Of course, a lot of this is using data from past season, which actually we discussed in yesterday's video. There are pros and cons to that, and a lot of it is opinion-based. So please do let me know down below if you disagree with anything I say. I'm always okay with that. I love to hear your thoughts down below, and if you agree with anything I say as well, do let me know as well. I think specifically at the £5 to £6 million price point, I think you can almost trust your gut feeling and just go for a bit of a differential punt. I know it's quite scary seeing the likes of Neto being so highly owned, but realistically, when a lot of the rest of your team, a lot of people can have Salah, Trent, James, Cancelo, Haaland, etc. This is the price point and the opportunity in your team where if you want to go a bit different, you can. And I wouldn't necessarily just pick someone because everyone else is. That being said, a lot of the players that are highly owned, in my opinion, are probably the best. I'm not going to literally go through every single player on all of these graphs and tables because we'll be here for literally over an hour if I do so. I wanted to highlight firstly that the 2 most popular players, in my opinion, are the 2 best players. And this is a situation where, like I said, I wouldn't pick someone just because they're highly owned. But if you do want me to explain why they are so highly owned, Neto and Martinelli, in my opinion, if I'm selecting the 2 players between £5 and £6 million that I currently like, it is Neto and Martinelli. As you can see, if you look at the non-penalty expected goal involvement number, which gives us a bit of an idea about their goal threat and creativity combined, Neto does have the best expected goal involvement per 90 on this list at 0.6. And it's actually the best by some distance. Martinelli is second at 0.53. You can see Harry Wilson down there at 0.59. This number is taken from a different site, which I can't 100% verify as being that accurate. It's Infogol is the site. And it also takes into account penalties as well. I can't remember if Wilson took any penalties, but it's not using exactly the same model as the rest of the players here. So I've put a little asterisk next to it. Regardless, Wilson was clearly an excellent option in the Championship, and I do think he'll be an excellent option here. But I'm not going to necessarily say that he's as good as Neto or his underlying data is as good as, just because it's a different model there. But Neto at 0.6, that is an exceptionally good number. Like, that is a lot. That's better than a lot of the premium players that we're looking at. It's better than Kane. It's better than Son. So it's not a bad option at all going for a 0.6 million pound Neto, for a 5.5 million pound Neto. The second best on this list is Martinelli at 0.53. And Martinelli maintained these numbers all through last season and previous season when he had a bit of a breakthrough. The numbers were good as well. So if Martinelli can nail down a space, and I guess that's the same for Neto. If they can both nail down a place in their starting 11, Neto and Martinelli, in my opinion, are still the 2 best options. Regardless of their ownership, there's a reason they're so highly owned. And a lot of the managers are quite well informed now, and it's probably indicative of the fact that so many managers have access to data that so many are going for Neto and Martinelli. But let's suggest that you don't want to go for Neto and Martinelli. Let's suggest that you either think they're rotation risks or you do just want to pick a bit of a differential, someone a little bit different in that spot. I've got a full list here of some other players that you might want to consider. I know Bailey's been getting quite a lot of attention. I'll be honest, his data from last season was pretty poor for Bailey. 0.33 non-penalty expected goal involvement is one of the worst on this list. Literally nothing to write home about there, but he's looked good in pre-season and he's the sort of player you can take a bit of a punt on. Fixtures aren't great for Villa, but the opening couple are. So I don't mind Bailey. For me, he's not in my current draft, though, right? So I don't actually think, specifically, I'm not that keen on any of the £5 million options other than Bailey. I know you've got Willock. I know you've got Dewsbury Hall. There are a few okay options at 5. I just think I prefer the 5.5 to £6 million price point a little bit more. Gordon is an option in there. Similar data to 4 now, so there's 2 other options in there. But again, 0.31 non-pen expected goal involvement. When you can see Neto at 0.6, I'm like, is there really a need to go for someone else? Potentially not. I do really like Elise, and you can see Elise's got the 3rd best expected goal involvement on this list at 0.43. Again, Palace were a very good attack. We spoke about Palace in the last video as well. The issue with Palace players is that the fixtures are just so poor that it might be worth starting with Neto. You've got Leeds and Fulham in the opening 2. Then after you get those 2 fixtures, see how Neto's doing. If he's not doing that well, then maybe you can switch to Elise. Ramsey I've put on this list just because so many people are keen on him. I get so many questions. Jacob Ramsey's data is really, really poor. Apart from Lingard, who played barely any minutes last season for Man United, Ramsey actually has the worst data on this list for non-penalty expected goal involvement. So for me, Ramsey's just not an option at all. Yes, I expect him to improve this season, and yes, Gerrard likes him, but I'd probably prefer, if you're going to go for a Villa player, I would prefer Bailey at 5, or I'd prefer one of the other 5.5s. I'm not a massive fan of Ramsey myself. Someone I am quite a big fan of, but the data doesn't necessarily support that, is Visser at Brentford, of course, 5.52. Pretty good for points per start last season. The 5th best fixtures in the league for an attacking perspective, according to the Fantasy Football Scout ticker. So I do really like Visser here. The only issue is there could potentially be a little bit of rotation for Brentford. They've got a few players that can play in that position. So similar to a lot of these players, I suppose, that's why they're cheap. Otherwise, they'd probably be more expensive. There is a slight worry there with rotation that maybe there isn't, even for someone like a Ramsey or a Gordon, you would expect them to play most games there. So something to think about. The most highly owned £6 million mid is Bruno G, right? And I didn't include him in the first section because I want to discuss him individually. Points per start was excellent, right? You can see the best on this list. He had the best points, he had the best sort of performance with respect to output, right? His actual output was absolutely fantastic at 5.5 points per start. His underlying data is good. It's the 4th best on this list, I believe, if you take away Wilson, 5th best if you put Wilson in. So I don't mind Bruno for that reason. There's something I'm just not so sure about. I don't know if it's positioning. I don't know if it's the fact that when he joined, he was classed as a DM. He's definitely not a defensive midfielder, but he definitely plays deeper than a lot of the other players on this list. And I think there are potentially better assets out there than Bruno G. That isn't to say he's a bad option at £6 million. It's just to say that I think I prefer some of the other 5.5s. And at 6, I think Martinelli would be my go-to option. But I don't dislike him. Minutes per expected goals team, though, Newcastle were actually one of the worst attacks in the Premier League last season at 18th, and they've got the 19th, their 19th for fixture difficulty over the first 6 as well. So they're not a great attack. They've not got the best fixtures in the world, and his actual underlying data wasn't the best on this list. So for all of those reasons, Bruno G's may be a no for now for me, but I don't dislike it. If you want to go for him, the opening fixture against Nottingham Forest is definitely a nice one. Speaking of Nottingham Forest, Lingard is sort of okay, isn't he? I think he's a decent option. There's no point paying too much attention to his data from last season because he didn't play many minutes for Manchester United. It wasn't good at all. The season before that obviously did very, very well for West Ham at the back end of the season. So we've seen what he can do. Again, I think Lingard's a bit more of a wait and see for me. Let's see what position he plays for Forest. Let's make sure he is 100% nailed on. And then when Forest fixtures get a little bit easier, maybe that's when we start to look towards Lingard. We've spoken about Martinelli. I think he's an excellent option. And then Wilson, I can't actually get his points per start, obviously, because he didn't play in the Premier League last season, but 0.59 non-penalty expected goal involvement. If that is accurate, exceptionally good. He's got pretty decent projected points. He's on set pieces for Fulham as well. He's on corners along with Andreas Pereira. He could be a really good option. The issue with Fulham, again, is that Fulham's fixtures aren't fantastic, so maybe more of a wait and see there too. So I guess putting this all together, unfortunately, I said I wouldn't go through all of the players individually. That's exactly what I've just done. But putting it all together, I think for me, Neto and Martinelli are still the 2 best options. If for some reason Neto or Martinelli got injured, I would maybe be looking at Visser as a cheeky option there. And then maybe like a Bailey, I might end up going there, or I might just end up switching to a slightly more expensive position. There are some decent 6.5 and £7 million midfielders. So for if Neto to get injured, maybe I'd just take a little bit of money out of my defence and try and stretch to like a Grealish or Coutinho, as we'll discuss a bit later on in the video. So let me know down below, do you like any of these cheaper mids? Are you currently, most people will be on Bailey or Neto. For me, I'm in my latest draft, I have Neto as my only cheap midfielder, and then the rest are more expensive. If I had to put another one in, it would be Martinelli. Let's move on to the next price point. Right, I'm actually not going to discuss every single player in a lot of detail in this section. I've just put some players on here just to fill it out, and also because I know sometimes they're quite popular. For example, never have they entered my consideration. That isn't to say they aren't good options, but Saint Maximin, Trossard, and Ward-Prowse, they're a no for me. I've just put them on here so that if you, whilst I'm talking, or if you want to pause the video, you can glance at their underlying data. Not terrible, but just for me, they're not fantastic options. Similarly, to be honest, with Ødegaard, the reason I've got Ødegaard on this list is he's actually got the highest projected points out of everyone at this price point on FPL Review. I don't know why. I would be interested to ask the man that makes the algorithm for FPL Review why on earth Ødegaard is at 18.6 projected points. Minutes obviously come into it, but I don't think he's 100% nailed on. He has some sort of rotation risk there. We've seen Smith Rowe played through the centre when he was fit at the start of pre-season, played in the number 10 role. Vieira has been signed to potentially play there as well. So I think there's a bit of rotation there for Ødegaard, and his underlying data is pretty poor. So I know a lot of people have been asking me about Ødegaard. For me, he's a decent option. I just think I'd prefer to go up to Saka at 8 or to go for Martinelli at 6 or just avoid Arsenal, maybe go for Gabriel Jesus up top. So for me, Ødegaard's a no. Same with Saint Maximin, Trossard and Ward-Prowse. Sinistera is an interesting one. Again, I've got his non-penalty expected goal involvement from FB Ref there at 0.51. It's not bad at all. He could be a decent option. I just think that's a bit of a wait and see there. Along with Aronson at 5.5, who I didn't actually include in the previous section. I just couldn't get enough of his data. But Aronson along with Sinistera, I just think that Leeds in general are a bit of a wait and see for me, but especially two new players coming to the Prem. They've just lost Rafinha. I'd like to see how they settle down. But if you do want to take a real punt of the off, Aronson and Sinistera could be two really decent options, to be fair, and I don't dislike them at all. We've then got a very popular option at the moment, someone that is actually in my latest draft, which is Marcus Rashford. Last couple of seasons been quite disappointing, but before that, he has been so effective for Manchester United. And we've seen at points his data be pushed above 0.5, 0.6 non-penalty expected goal involvement. So I don't mind Rashford. He's in my current draft, but I would struggle to justify it other than the fact that Ten Hag looks to be getting a lot out of Man United and we look very good in pre-season. Outside of that, I can't give you a lot of justification to going towards Rashford. So if you're someone that's quite sceptical, I don't mind the fact that you're sceptical. It probably makes sense. There's not a lot to suggest here that he's the best option. We were actually the 6th best attack in the league last season. Expected goals, minutes per expected goals team is 6th. So Man United were, by all means, a pretty decent attack last season, 58.2 minutes per expected goal. So if Ten Hag can actually improve that, we are looking at a top 6 attack there. And I do think that Rashford could be at the heart of a lot of what we do this season. Fixture difficulty-wise, we're sort of mid-table, as you probably know by now anyway. Like I said, St. Max, Trossard, Ward-Prowse, not really in my thinking. At 6.5, it's really Rashford or no one for me. If I had to go elsewhere, I guess Ødegaard is fine. £7 million, you've actually got 4 really good options. I suppose you have 5. I've taken Bernardo Silva off this list just because I can only include so many players, right? There are a few players that I've had to admit here, but I don't mind Bernardo Silva. I just think I'd rather go for Grealish, who's the other City player on this list. Starting with Harvey Barnes, points per start is actually the best on this list, Harvey Barnes last season, especially at the back end of last season. Really started to pick up form. Sort of the middle half of the back end really looked quite good, Harvey Barnes. Then he struggled a little bit of rotation in Europe, but he is someone that has decent underlying data at 0.41 expected goal involvement and someone that is very explosive on his day. And when he catches form, jumping on Harvey Barnes is definitely a good option. So I think that if you're looking for a £7 million price point and you're not convinced by the others, you could definitely do worse than Harvey Barnes. It's just a slightly tricky start with the fixtures. As you can see here, 14th in the Premier League for fixtures for Leicester. So I think Barnes, as we'll discuss Maddison in a second, and Vardy, you could definitely wait until game week 6 to go for one of the Leicester boys. That's when their fixtures start to turn for the better. So I don't mind Barnes. Probably not in my thinking. I haven't had him in many drafts at all. Coutinho's similar with respect to the fixtures, aren't fantastic. Slightly worse expected goal involvement, slightly worse points per start as well. So I think if I were to go for one of Barnes and Coutinho, I would probably have Barnes just ahead of him. So that would be my pecking order for those two. But really, my favourite £7 million midfielder is actually Grealish. I discussed him, and it's not just a band. I know it's been a bit of a bandwagon recently. I discussed him about 3 weeks ago on my under-the-radar players. I said that Grealish might be top of sort of the differential under-the-radar players. He's looked really, really great in pre-season again. He looked so good at the back end of last season. Data's been pretty good, passing the eye test. You can see he's got 0.49 expected goal involvement, which is the second best on this list after Sinistera. It's the best on this list of players that played in the Prem. City are the best attack. City have the best attacking fixtures. I genuinely have been thinking about ways that I can get Grealish in, whether that's instead of Rashford or alongside Rashford, and maybe just drop in that cheaper position altogether in the midfield. Let me know down below what you think of Grealish, but I really like him as an option. And I think there's been a lot of talk about Foden sharing minutes with Mahrez on the right. If Foden does share minutes with Mahrez on the right, Grealish pretty much has a clean run at that left wing spot. So I think Grealish will start game week 1. I think he'll get a lot of minutes early on. And if he continues to impress, I think he could not nail down the spot, but he could become first choice in that left wing spot. So I really like Grealish. The final £7 million midfielder is Zaha. Not a lot to say there. I think there are much better options, but assuming he stays on penalties at some point this season, as he always is, especially in double game weeks, Zaha will become an option. But with the fixtures, with the relatively poor underlying data at 0.35, I'm not that keen on Zaha. Grealish is definitely the pick of the bunch at 7 million for me. And then just to finish with 7.5 Sancho, he sort of sits in between those 2 price points, right? We've got the £8 million mids, and then we've got the 7 million and below. Sancho's in that really awkward, tricky spot where you're saving a bit on the 8s, but then if one of the £8 million mids does really well, it's difficult to try and get to them. But I do like Sancho. And as I've said for a while, if I could find an extra million to go from Rashford to Sancho in my latest draft, I do prefer Sancho to Rashford. I think their numbers will be fairly similar. Sancho's more of a creative spark, whereas Rashford's more of a goal threat. The reason that I prefer Sancho to Rashford is, in my personal opinion, as a Manchester United fan, I think that Sancho is significantly more nailed on. I think he'll play significantly more minutes than Rashford. I think Rashford will rotate with potentially Martial if Ronaldo starts and Elanga. And as a result, I think Sancho will be the starting winger almost every week for Manchester United. So putting that all together, I would say that on this list, my 3 favourite options are probably Rashford, Grealish and Sancho. At the moment, at the time of recording, I really want to get Grealish in, but at the moment, from this entire list, the only player that I currently have is Rashford. It's just due to that really nice price point. Let me know down below, do you have any players from this price point, or have you gone for the cheaper ones? And then the £8 million mids, which of course have been a big talking point. So I'm not going to do this section in much detail at all. What I will do is I'll just refer you to this video. I'll try and remember to flash it on the screen. If not, just go back a few days. I did an entire video, almost half an hour long, just on the £8 million midfielders. So I think they're all fantastic options. All 7 of them are excellent options. I did my best to try and rank them and discuss the pros and cons of each. If you do want a quick recap, because you can't be bothered to go and watch that video, that's absolutely fine. Quick recap, I do still believe that Diaz is the #1 option. I just think he's got a good mixture of everything. Fixtures, playing in a great team, great potential to improve based on last season. He's got the highest projected points here according to FPL review. So for me, Diaz is the pick of the bunch. I did discuss that Foden and Mahrez's numbers, though, are just so good that if you think you can predict Pep Roulette, I like Foden, I like Mahrez. Foden is just slightly more nailed on for me. Last season, Foden started 75% of games for which he was available. Mahrez only started 42% of games, less than half of the games available to him. So I still think that Foden is the more nailed on player, but of course Foden didn't go on tour. Mahrez did go on tour. So all eyes on the Community Shield, and I think that'll give us a bit of an idea about which players are worth selecting from Manchester City. And then sort of Maddison, Mount and Saka, I think are all good options in and of their own right. I think for me, Saka's probably the pick of the bunch just due to being most nailed and maybe being on pens. But as you can see, Mount's got really good underlying data at 0.56 non-penalty expected goal involvement. The one player I didn't discuss in a lot of detail in that video is Bowen. Definitely just worth discussing. He's similar to Sancho in that he's not in the £8 million price bracket. He's just outside of that. It's such a shame that West Ham have City in Game Week 1. So I guarantee if they didn't have City in Game Week 1, Bowen would be owned by significantly more managers. I think Bowen would be up there, maybe sort of 25-30% owned if they had Nottingham Forest Game Week 1 rather than in Game Week 2. I genuinely think that would change it, which maybe shouldn't be the case. We're picking these players for sort of 3 to 6 game weeks. Maybe Bowen's going under the radar. And not only did Bowen perform very well last season with respect to actual returns and FPL points, you can see 6 points per start. He actually had pretty good non-penalty expected goal involvement as well. You can see almost as good as Mount and Diaz there as well. So the fixtures aren't great for West Ham. I do personally think it's probably not worth paying the extra 0.5 for Bowen on top of the other £8 million mids, but one that's definitely worth considering, along with Sancho. Maybe just don't forget about Bowen, just because he's at a slightly trickier price point, maybe still consider him. But for me, if I'm to select your top 3, it would be Diaz, one of Foden and Mahrez, personally Foden for me. And it's a very tight battle between Saka, Mount and Maddison. I haven't mentioned Kulusevski. It's not because I don't think he's a good option. It's just, as you can see, he's got the worst data on this list for non-penalty expected goal involvement. And as soon as Richarlison is back from Game Week 2 onwards, I do think we'll see a little bit of rotation. But every single player on this list is exceptional. For me, Diaz is the pick of the bunch. So guys, this is a bit of a sad little table, isn't it? With only 5 players in sort of that premium bracket from 10 million upwards. So between Bowen at 8.5 and Sterling/Bruno at 10, there's no one in that price bracket. So there's a bit of a jump up. And I suppose Bruno and Sterling aren't quite premiums. In my previous videos, I've been calling them half premiums. They're not quite at that premium price bracket, but I've decided to group them in here because they're definitely more expensive than the £8 million mids. So Bruno and Sterling, both good options in their own right. Bruno was very disappointing last season, both for underlying data and his actual performances. I do expect that to improve this season. Manchester United in general look a lot better. I won't keep going on about Man United in these videos, but I'll try not to. But for me, Sterling is the one that stands out. You can look at that number, 0.71 non-penalty expected goal involvement. Sterling has always put up such excellent numbers. However, he is playing in a Man City side where, as you can see by all of their data, if you play on the wing for City or in that false 9 spot, you're going to have really good non-penalty expected goal involvement. They just create so many opportunities that it's virtually impossible not to. And Sterling does get into the position for a lot of what we call tap-ins. So that's why he's always got such a high number. I still think he will put up really good data for Chelsea. And I'm gutted. If Sterling was 9 million, I almost promise you Sterling would be in my team. It's just at 10 million. It's just a little bit too much for me at the moment. I'm really struggling to find 10 million to go for Sterling, but I do really like him as an option. If for some reason you've got a position in your team where you can go for that, along with Vardy, I would argue that Sterling and Vardy are my favourite 2 differentials to start the season. They're just at really tricky price points, but that's such good data. If you think he will click and start for Chelsea straight away, I think Sterling could be really nice to start in Game Week 1. And then we've got the 3 premiums, De Bruyne, Son and Salah. I'm going to keep saying what I said last season. It didn't work very well for me. I finished 35k, by the way, for those that were asking in the comments. It's a pretty decent rank. It wasn't fantastic, but I kept avoiding De Bruyne and Son because I kept pointing to this and saying, listen, De Bruyne and Son don't have great underlying data. De Bruyne and Son don't don't have that many opportunities. De Bruyne and Son aren't getting that many sort of high XG opportunities. And they continued to overperform, to which extent they were the two players that overperformed their expected goal involvement by the greatest number last season. So if you're looking for players that continue to overperform their expected data, absolutely elite finishers and assisting players as well in teams that finish a lot of opportunities. Son is always assisting Kane. Kane finishes low XG opportunities, I should say, quite well. Same for De Bruyne. It's going to get even better probably with Haaland. So I said at the back in the last season in my season review that my big mistake was looking at De Bruyne and Son's underlying data and taking it at sort of face value, saying De Bruyne's only got 0.56 non-penalty expected goal involvement. That's really not great. I'm not going to go for De Bruyne. I need to realise that he's a very good finisher, and the players that he's passing to are great finishers as well. So he will tend to overperform that expected data slightly, and Son even more so. Son is arguably the best finisher in world football at the moment, and Kane is up there as well. So I would almost predict again that Son will overperform his expected data. So to put that together, De Bruyne and Son's underlying data is nothing to write home about. Sterling has better data than both, but they are world-class finishers playing in teams with other world-class finishers as well. So maybe I'm reading into that too much, but for me, this is the reason I can't justify going for Son or De Bruyne above Salah. Yes, they're brilliant finishers, but Salah's also a good finisher, and he puts up just ridiculous numbers. Look at this, 34.9 projected points. It blows everyone out the water on FPL Review. Fancy Football Scout, Hub, Fix, whatever site you want to use, Salah will blow everyone out the water for projected points. 8.5 points per start last season, 0.86 non-penalty expected goal involvement. Better than every single person in the league. The only player in the league that has better than that is Haaland, who had 0.88. But that was in the Bundesliga last season. So in the Premier League, Salah is better than anyone. Second best for minutes per expected goals per team. Second best fixtures. Salah is the GOAT of FPL, and he will be in my team come Game Week 1 for that reason. We did discuss some no Salah drafts a couple of videos ago. So go check that out if you're someone that doesn't want to go with Salah. But for me, very obviously, Salah is the premium to go for. This data would suggest that Son and De Bruyne aren't essential, but they're so good that they probably are. And then just think about Sterling for me. If you're going to take one thing from the end of this video, think about Sterling. I like him as a half premium. If you can get a £10 million price point in your team, Vardy and Sterling, I love them at those prices. Let me know down below what your current premium situation looks like, midfielders, attackers, etc. For me, it's Salah and a premium attacker. I don't mind anyone on this list, though. So guys, there you have it. Those are, in my opinion, the best midfielders in FPL for the upcoming season. I've actually managed to keep that video fairly short, which I'm pretty proud of. We didn't discuss the £4.5 million midfielders. That's because, realistically, it's probably Andreas Pereira or De Silva of Brentford. But at the moment, there's not a lot to go off. Andreas Pereira didn't play in the Prem last season. De Silva didn't play at all either due to injury. So it's very difficult to try and look into that underlying data of the 4.5. So just use preseason, use your eye test, pick the one that you think is the best option in your personal opinion. At the moment, I'm on Andreas Pereira. If you are enjoying this series, this is the second part of a three-part series. Tomorrow will be the best forwards in FPL as well. Please do drop a like down below. I don't really set like targets, but please do smash the like button. Make sure to subscribe as well. I do appreciate all of the support I can get in preseason. Drop a comment down below for the algorithm gods, whatever you want to say, just to feed the algorithm gods. They do love it when you drop a comment. Until next time, guys, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.